open this. She inherited a shop full of clocks left by customers who never returned, some waiting decades. She began repairing them, noticed that every clock once fixed and wound settled eventually on the exact same time, regardless of when she wound them, regardless of their individual mechanisms. She found no fault in her work. The clock simply agreed on an hour that meant nothing to her, until she found the ledger, and the specific hour decades ago that every customer stopped coming back. Don't wind any old clocks tonight without checking what time they settle on. It is time for another atmospheric story. Chapter 182. Clock repair shops accumulate unclaimed work across enough years. Customers move away, pass away, simply forget the ticket they were given and the promise to return. Most repairers who inherit such a shop find a modest collection of abandoned pieces, a normal feature of a trade that requires customers to trust their possessions to someone else for an extended period. What is not normal is for those abandoned pieces, repaired individually across months of careful work, to begin agreeing with each other on an hour, consistently. Regardless of when they are wound, regardless of how different their mechanisms, regardless of anything the repairer's professional training would suggest should produce such consistency. A woman had inherited her grandmother's clock repair shop, a small business the grandmother had run for over 40 years, its backroom accumulating, across that time, dozens of clocks left for repair and never collected. The granddaughter, trained in the same trade, decided to work through the unclaimed collection methodically, repairing what could be repaired, cataloging what remained, in the process of deciding what to do with a business she had inherited but was still determining whether to continue. She began with the older pieces, working through the mechanisms with the patient attention the trade required. The first clock she completed, wound and set, an antique piece, considerably damaged when she began, settled after some hours of running at 1:42. She thought nothing of it. Moved to the next clock. The second clock, different maker, different mechanism, unrelated to the first in any way she could identify, she completed several days later, wound it, set it running, checked it that evening, 1:42. She assumed reasonably that she had somehow set it incorrectly, matching the first clock without realizing it. Reset it carefully, deliberately, to a different time. Checked it the following morning, 1:42 again. She sat with this for a long time before continuing to the third clock, repaired it with even more careful attention to avoiding any repeated setting, wound it, let it run undisturbed for 3 full days before checking. 1:42. If these stories have found their way to you, if you find yourself returning to this quiet room, there is something small you can do. Like and subscribe. It tells me, and whatever else watches from this room, that you were here and that you intend to find your way back. If you have a story of your own, Granny is always listening, watching, waiting. She began testing systematically, repaired clocks across her remaining months of work, dozens of them spanning decades of manufacture, entirely unrelated mechanisms, no possible technical connection between any of them. She varied her methods deliberately, winding at different times, setting to different hours, even disassembling and reassembling identical clocks to rule out any shared fault in her own repair technique. Every single clock, given enough time to settle into its own rhythm, arrived eventually at 1:42. Not immediately, some took hours, others days, but always, eventually, that specific time. Shock Koi. The workbench beneath her hands after the 20th clock confirmed the pattern. Cold in a way the shop's ordinary temperature did not explain. I wonder if every clock you repaired settled eventually on the exact same time, regardless of anything you did to prevent it. How many clocks would you test before you stopped trying to disprove the pattern? If you have a story of your own, this quiet room has space for your experiences, too. Granny is always listening. She found the ledger in the shop's workbench drawer, her grandmother's careful records spanning the full 40 years of the business. Customer names, dates received, descriptions of the work needed, and for the unclaimed pieces specifically, a final column her grandmother had apparently added at some point, a note, brief, beside each entry that had never been collected. She read through them carefully. Different customers, different clocks, different years, spanning the full 4 decades of her grandmother's ownership, but each note, in her grandmother's careful handwriting, referenced the same detail. The customer had not returned following an incident at the shop, an incident her grandmother described only obliquely, never in full detail. But that had occurred, according to the dates recorded, at exactly 1:42 in the afternoon. You are still here. Good. Some stories need a witness all the way to the end. I wonder if every unclaimed object in an inherited shop pointed toward the same hour. What do you think happened at that hour that so many different people never returned from? Her grandmother's ledger did not specify what had happened at 1:42, simply noted, beside entry after entry across 40 years, that the customer had not returned as expected following the incident. She asked family members who might remember something of her grandmother's early years in the shop, found only vague recollections, something about a difficult period decades past that her grandmother had never discussed in detail, and that the family had learned long ago not to ask about. She completed her inventory of the unclaimed collection, every clock eventually agreeing on 1:42. She did not attempt to determine, beyond what the ledger obliquely suggested, what had actually occurred at that hour in that shop across whatever singular event had apparently touched so many different customers across so many different years. In Dania, some hours, once fixed into enough different mechanisms, simply insist on being remembered, regardless of whether anyone remaining can explain why. I think about time and what it means for so many separate mechanisms, built by different makers in different eras, brought to the same shop by different customers across 40 years, to agree, once carefully repaired, on a single specific hour. Most of us understand time as something clocks measure rather than something clocks remember. But this particular shop and whatever occurred there at 1:42 across some singular event that touched every one of these unclaimed pieces suggests something else. That certain hours, once significant enough, embed themselves into whatever mechanism happens to be present, and continue insisting on that significance, regardless of who repairs the mechanism, regardless of how carefully the repair avoids any deliberate setting. Nda. I do not know what happened at 1:42 in that shop decades ago. I know only that dozens of clocks and dozens of customers who never returned seemed to agree it mattered considerably. Another whispered story from Japan, shared quietly here beside the kotatsu. If you inherit an old shop, workshop, or collection containing multiple mechanical pieces left by customers who never returned, repair them carefully, and once repaired, let each one run undisturbed for as long as it needs to settle into its own rhythm. If you find across enough pieces that they begin agreeing on a specific time, regardless of when you wind them, regardless of how different their mechanisms, search whatever records exist for the business's history. Look specifically for an incident, referenced perhaps only obliquely at exactly that hour. Because some events embed themselves deeply enough into whatever was present at the time that the mechanisms themselves seem to remember, long after the people involved have stopped returning to claim what they left behind, and long after anyone remaining can fully explain what precisely that remembered hour actually contains. If this story stayed with you, if the dark or the shadow feels a little closer tonight, you know where to find me. I am always here beside the kotatsu, watching, waiting. And if you wish others to find their way here too, there is something small you can do. Like and subscribe. I would not object. And if you have a story of your own, this quiet room has space for your experiences too. Granny is always listening.